Somewhere between midnight and dawn, your body starts a construction project nobody ever told you about. In the first stretch of deep sleep, your body releases its biggest pulse of growth hormone, and that hormone goes straight to work on repair. Problem is, that whole project runs on raw materials, and most folks go to bed without supplying a single one. One pilot study out of a sleep research center found older adults slept measurably better after adding one specific fruit. That fruit is number 1 on today's list. It is not the strangest one. Number 11 is something most people throw straight in the stock pot and forget about. I spent over 20 years as a nurse, watching people run on empty at exactly the hour their body needed fuel most. Nothing here replaces the person who actually knows your chart and your medications. 15 foods, each one tied to a different piece of the overnight repair process. Let's start with the fruit that pilot study was actually testing, and why timing matters more than most people realize. Sleep isn't just rest, it's a construction shift. Every night, while you're out cold, crews go to work on the parts of you that took a beating during the day. And just like any crew, they need supplies. I think about this every time I walk out past the cherry trees at the edge of my property, early, before the fogs burned off the field. My grandmother had a tree just like them, or maybe it was her sister's. I mixed the two up more than I'd like to admit. Doesn't matter, really. What matters is what's inside that little red fruit. Tart cherries carry a small, natural amount of melatonin right in the flesh. Melatonin is just your body's evening bell, the signal that tells every system it's time to wind things down and start the overnight repair work. Most people think they need a pill for that. Turns out the fruit's been ringing that same bell for longer than pharmacies have existed. A pilot study out of a sleep research center gave older adults with insomnia a serving of tart cherry juice, morning and evening, for 2 weeks. The people drinking it slept longer and more efficiently than the group that didn't. Small study, worth saying that plainly, but it lines up with something bigger researchers have found in tart cherries, a cluster of anthocyanins, the deep red pigment compounds that seem to ease inflammation in tired, overworked tissue. Runners have been drinking tart cherry juice after hard training for exactly that reason, and studies on recovery have shown less next-day soreness in the ones who did. Here's how I use them. A small handful of dried tart cherries, unsweetened if you can find them, about an hour before bed, or a small glass of the tart cherry juice concentrate, diluted with water, not the sweetened cocktail mix sitting next to it on the shelf. Read the label. Half the bottles calling themselves cherry juice barely have any cherry in them. Simple, and surprisingly well-studied for something this ordinary. I'm not going to tell you a piece of fruit is going to fix a serious sleep disorder. It won't. If you're lying awake most nights, that's a conversation for your doctor, not a grocery list. What the research suggests is smaller and more honest than that. A nightly habit that gives your body one more small advantage heading into the hours it needs most. We'll come back to melatonin more than once tonight. It shows up again in a fruit most people eat for the vitamin C and never think twice about the rest. That other fruit I mentioned, the one people eat for vitamin C and stop thinking about, is the kiwi. Researchers at a university in Taiwan ran a 4-week trial where adults with sleep complaints ate 2 kiwis, skin and all if they could manage it, about an hour before bed. By the end of the month, people were falling asleep faster, staying asleep longer, and reporting they actually felt like their sleep worked, not just that it happened. Here's the kitchen table version of why. Kiwi is one of a handful of fruits that contain measurable amounts of serotonin right in the flesh, not the brain chemical itself crossing into your head, but a peripheral signal your gut recognizes and responds to. What actually drives the sleep benefit is most likely a different route. Kiwi carries tryptophan, the raw material your body uses to build serotonin from scratch inside the brain, along with a solid dose of folate, which acts as a required helper in that same conversion process. So you're not getting one ingredient, you're getting 2 pieces of the same puzzle, both pointed in the same direction. Fiber's worth mentioning too, though it doesn't get the credit. A kiwi a day is a real, measurable amount of fiber, and steadier digestion overnight tends to mean fewer of those middle-of-the-night wake-ups that have nothing to do with your mind and everything to do with your gut. I grow a kiwi vine on the south fence, more out of stubbornness than good planning. They need a male and female plant to fruit, and I didn't know that when I put the first one in. Took 3 years and a second vine before I saw a single kiwi. The Lord's timing on some things is a good deal slower than mine. Practical use is about as simple as it gets. 2 kiwis, roughly an hour before bed. Skin on if you don't mind the texture. Skin off if you do. You're not losing much either way. Keep a bowl of them on the counter instead of buried in the crisper drawer. You'll actually eat them if you can see them. None of this replaces treatment for a diagnosed sleep condition. If sleep's been a genuine struggle for months, not just an occasional rough night, that's worth bringing to your doctor directly. What the research points to here is smaller and steadier, a habit, not a cure. Next up is a food most of us were told to eat for our hearts. Turns out the reason might be closer to our pillow than our arteries. Fatty fish, salmon especially, gets talked about for heart health so often that the sleep angle gets buried completely. Salmon brings 2 things to this conversation. First, vitamin D. Your brain has vitamin D receptors sitting right in the regions that help regulate your sleep-wake cycle, and low vitamin D levels have shown up again and again in research tied to poor sleep quality. Second, omega-3 fats, specifically the long-chain kind found almost nowhere except fatty fish. Those fats help keep the outer wall of every cell soft and responsive, sort of like keeping the hinges oiled on every door and window in the house, so signals, including the one telling your body it's bedtime, get through clean instead of getting stuck. There's a study conducted by Norwegian researchers that stuck with me. In one structured nutrition trial, men who ate farmed salmon 3 times a week over several months showed better sleep quality and better next-day functioning than a comparison group eating chicken, pork, or beef instead, with meals matched for protein and timing. The study had a specific population and a controlled setting, so it's not the final word, but it's real data, and the fish was the variable that changed. I don't love store-bought salmon most weeks, if I'm honest. The good stuff isn't cheap, and I've learned to watch for a sale and stock the freezer rather than pay full price weekly. Wild caught when I can manage it. Farmed's not the enemy some folks make it out to be, but the omega-3 content tends to run a bit lower. Twice a week is the number that keeps showing up in the research as a reasonable target, and it doesn't have to be salmon every time. Sardines, mackerel, and trout all carry a similar fat profile, and sardines in particular are about as cheap as fish gets. One caution worth a plain mention. If you're on blood thinners, fish oil in concentrated supplement form can add to that effect, so anything beyond food level amounts is worth running past your doctor first. Eating salmon for dinner twice a week is a different matter entirely than taking high-dose fish oil capsules on top of a prescription blood thinner. Walnuts are next, and they're one of the only foods on this whole list that hands you 2 separate sleep compounds in the same bite. Walnuts hand you 2 separate sleep compounds in the same bite. They contain measurable melatonin, similar to what we talked about with Tart cherries, right in the nut itself. And on top of that, walnuts are one of the richest plant sources of alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 that your body can partially convert into the same long-chain fats found in salmon. Partially is the honest word there. The conversion rate is low. Most research puts it under 10% for EPA and considerably lower for DHA, so walnuts aren't a full replacement for fish. Think of them as a second, smaller supply line running alongside it. A study out of a university nutrition lab found that people eating more walnuts had measurably higher melatonin levels showing up in their blood afterward. Not a massive shift, but a real, documented one, in the direction you'd want. Walnuts have also shown up in a small number of studies looking at general markers of brain health in older adults, though that research is broader than sleep specifically and still developing. One practical note worth passing along: walnuts turn rancid faster than most nuts because of how much oil they carry, so buy smaller amounts more often rather than one huge bag that sits in the pantry for months, and keep them in the refrigerator if your kitchen runs warm in summer. A rancid walnut won't hurt you, but it won't taste like much of anything either, and you'll likely give up on the habit before it takes hold. There's also magnesium in walnuts, which we're going to talk about properly in a few minutes when we get to bananas, because magnesium deserves its own moment. For now, just know walnuts are quietly contributing to that side of things too. Texture matters more than people think with walnuts. Buy them raw, not roasted and salted. If you can find a source you trust, The salted, oiled kind at the gas station aren't doing you many favors. I keep a jar of shelled walnuts on the counter, not in the pantry because if I have to dig for something at 9 at night, I won't bother. A small handful, maybe 7 or 8 halves, an hour or so before bed. That's it. Simple. Rare, honestly, to find one food carrying 2 separate pieces of the same puzzle. Most of what we'll cover tonight brings one strength to the table. Walnuts bring 2, quietly, without much fanfare. Cottage cheese is next, and if you've never thought of it as a nighttime food, you're about to change your mind. It works on a completely different clock than anything we've covered so far. Cottage cheese works on a completely different clock than anything we've covered so far, because this one isn't about melatonin or serotonin at all. This one's about protein, and specifically, how slowly your body can use it. Most protein you eat digests fast. Whey protein, the kind in a lot of protein shakes, is in your bloodstream within an hour and mostly used up within 2 or 3. Casein, which makes up the bulk of the protein in cottage cheese, works nothing like that. It clots slightly in the stomach and releases amino acids gradually, over 4 to 7 hours, depending on the form, which happens to line up almost exactly with a full night's sleep. Researchers tested this directly, giving active adults a serving of casein protein right before bed and measuring what happened in their muscle tissue overnight. The group that ate the casein showed higher rates of new muscle protein being built while they slept, compared to a group that ate nothing before bed. Your body was going to run its repair shift regardless. The casein gave it something to actually build with, instead of borrowing from tissue you'd rather keep. Cottage cheese fell out of fashion for a long stretch, tied up with old-fashioned diet plans from decades back. I think it's due for a comeback, and not for the reasons it got popular the first time around. If dairy doesn't sit well with you, plain Greek yogurt carries a similar slow-digesting protein profile and can fill much the same role, though it won't match cottage cheese's casein content quite as closely. I think of it like this. Most proteins are a flash flood, in and gone. Casein's a slow drip, working through the night, one steady trickle at a time. This one matters most for anyone doing physical work, gardening, lifting, walking a lot on their feet all day, or anyone simply getting older, because muscle tissue gets harder to hold onto with each passing decade, whether we like admitting it or not. I notice it myself, some mornings more than others. Plain, full-fat cottage cheese, a half cup or so, about 30 minutes before bed. Skip the flavored cups loaded with sugar, read that label because a lot of them sneak in more sugar than a candy bar. A little cinnamon or a few berries stirred in does the same job without the added sweetener. Pineapple's next, and it's probably the last fruit you'd expect to see on a sleep list. Pineapple is probably the last fruit most people would put on a sleep list. It's bright, it's sweet, it's summer picnic food. Not exactly what comes to mind at 9:30 at night when you're trying to wind down. But here's what 2 separate research teams found when they actually measured what happens inside the body after eating it. Researchers out of Khon Kaen University in Thailand gave healthy volunteers a serving of pineapple, then measured a specific marker of melatonin activity in their blood and urine afterward. The rise was substantial, measurable, documented, and considerably larger than what the same researchers found after eating oranges in the same crossover trial. A second study out of the same group, published in the Journal of Pineal Research, confirmed the pattern. Pineapple consumption was associated with a meaningful increase in circulating melatonin, bringing levels into the range your body normally targets naturally on its own during the evening hours. Now, these studies weren't sleep outcome studies. Nobody tracked whether participants fell asleep faster or slept longer afterward, and I want to be plain about that distinction. What they documented is that something in the fruit moves the melatonin dial. Whether that translates directly into better sleep is the next question researchers are still working toward. But given everything we've already covered tonight, how Tart cherries do it, how Kiwi does it, how walnuts carry their own small amount, pineapple fits into a consistent pattern that's hard to ignore. What's doing the work is the melatonin naturally present in the fruit flesh itself. Pineapple also carries a solid dose of vitamin C, manganese, and B vitamins, all of which support the same general repair processes your body runs overnight, though none of those make as direct a case for sleep as the melatonin piece does. Fresh is best here, and a small bowl rather than a large one. Ideally, not the syrup-packed canned kind, though if that's what you have, drain it well and it's far from useless. Timing matters too. About an hour before bed, same as we've said for most of tonight's list, gives your body time to absorb and act on what it's been given before you're actually trying to sleep. I don't grow pineapple. The Oregon winters put a firm end to that idea the one time I thought about trying it, but I keep a fresh one on the counter most weeks when they're in season, and a bag of frozen chunks in the freezer for the rest of the year. Thawed from frozen retains most of what matters here. Simple, inexpensive, and genuinely surprising once you know what it's quietly doing. Eggs come next, and they're doing something for your brain that almost nobody talks about. Eggs are doing something for your brain that almost nobody talks about, mostly because it doesn't have a catchy name attached to it. Eggs are one of the best food sources of choline anywhere on the shelf. Choline's a nutrient your body uses to build and repair cell membranes, including the ones wrapped around brain and nerve cells. Repair work doesn't stop at muscle and skin. Every night your brain is doing its own quiet maintenance, clearing out waste that built up over the day, the way a garbage truck makes its rounds while the neighborhood sleeps. Choline is part of what keeps that whole system running the way it should. Eggs also carry a full, complete set of amino acids, including a fair amount of glycine, which researchers have found plays a real role in improving sleep quality on its own. We'll talk about glycine again later tonight because it shows up in a very different food, and it's worth understanding properly when we get there. The yolks, where almost all of this lives, by the way. If you've been tossing yolks and eating whites only for years because somebody told you to watch your cholesterol, it might be worth a conversation with your doctor about whether that's still the right call for you specifically. Research on dietary cholesterol and heart risk has shifted a good deal over the last 15 years, and blanket advice from decades ago doesn't always hold up the way it used to. I keep hens, 6 of them right now, down from 11 after a hard winter I'd rather not relive. There's something grounding about walking out at dusk, gathering what they've given you that day, and knowing exactly where your dinner came from. Feels like a small, daily gift, if I'm honest about it. The creator built a remarkable amount of nutrition into something that small. 2 eggs, scrambled, boiled, however you take them, a few hours before bed as part of a regular dinner, is plenty. This isn't a food you need to force into a bedtime ritual. It just needs a place at your table more evenings than not. Bananas are next, and they're carrying 2 minerals your muscles have been waiting on all day. Bananas carry 2 minerals your muscles have been waiting on all day. Magnesium and potassium both live in a banana, and together they work like the off switch for muscle tissue. Magnesium in particular helps regulate the signals that tell muscles to relax rather than stay tense, which is part of why magnesium deficiency gets linked so often to restless legs and middle-of-the-night muscle cramps. If you've ever woken up at 2 in the morning with a calf cramp that nearly put you on the floor, low magnesium is one of the first things worth looking at. Magnesium does something else too, further up the chain. It plays a supporting role in regulating the hormone that governs your whole sleep-wake rhythm, and research has linked low magnesium levels to lighter, more fragmented sleep overall, even without an obvious cramp to point to. Then there's the vitamin B6, which bananas carry a solid amount of. B6 is a required helper in the process that converts tryptophan into serotonin and then melatonin, the same overnight chain we've mentioned a few times already tonight. Without enough B6 in the system, that conversion slows down regardless of how much tryptophan you're actually eating. So a banana isn't doing one job, it's doing 3, quietly, none of them flashy enough to make headlines on their own. 1 banana, sliced, maybe with a spoonful of that walnut jar we already talked about, an hour or so before bed. My mother kept a bowl of them on the kitchen table my whole childhood, and I do the same now without really thinking about it. Some habits just get handed down whether you plan on it or not. Worth a plain word of caution here, too. If you're on medication for blood pressure, particularly certain diuretics, potassium-rich foods like bananas can occasionally need watching, since some of those medications already raise potassium levels on their own. Not a reason to avoid bananas, just a reason to know what your specific prescription does, and to ask your pharmacist or doctor if you're not sure. Oats are next, and they're the food most people already eat for breakfast, not bedtime, and that timing might be backwards. Oats are the food most people already eat for breakfast, not bedtime, and that timing might be backwards. Oats bring a small natural amount of melatonin, similar to what we've already seen in tart cherries and walnuts. But the more interesting piece is what oats do to the rest of your evening meal. Oats are a complex carbohydrate, meaning they break down slowly rather than flooding your system all at once. That slow, gentle rise causes a modest, well-managed insulin response, and that's exactly the carbohydrate tryptophan mechanism. The modest insulin response that follows clears competing amino acids out of the bloodstream and gives tryptophan a clearer route into the brain. Oats have a long folk history in this specific role too. Oat straw tea shows up in old home remedy books for exactly this reason, generations before anyone understood the mechanism behind it. Traditional use isn't the same as clinical proof, and I want to be honest about that distinction, but it's worth noting how often traditional practice and modern research end up pointing the same direction. Pair oats with something tryptophan-rich, cottage cheese, a few walnuts, a sliced banana, and you've stacked several pieces of tonight's list into one bowl. That's not just breakfast, it's 3 or 4 separate things we've already covered tonight, all working in the same direction. Oats also carry a meaningful amount of magnesium, on top of everything else, and that's no accident. Nearly every food on this list touches magnesium somewhere along the way, and that's not a coincidence. Magnesium's involved in over 300 separate processes in the body, sleep regulation being one small slice of a much bigger picture. For anyone managing blood sugar, steel-cut or old-fashioned rolled oats behave very differently from the instant packets loaded with sugar. Read the ingredient list before you buy. Some of those flavored packets have more added sugar than a candy bar, same as those flavored cottage cheese cups we talked about earlier. I make a small bowl most evenings in the colder months, more out of comfort than strategy if I'm being honest with you. There's something about a warm bowl in hand while the wood stove's ticking and the darks come down early that feels like the day's properly finished. Pumpkin seeds are next, and they're one of the most overlooked things sitting in most people's pantries. Pumpkin seeds are one of the most overlooked things sitting in most people's pantries, usually pushed to the back behind the sunflower seeds and forgotten about until next Halloween. They're one of the richest plant sources of magnesium you'll find anywhere, gram for gram ahead of almost every nut on this list. On top of that, they carry a genuine amount of tryptophan and a good dose of zinc, and zinc's worth mentioning on its own, because some smaller trials have found it plays a supporting role in sleep quality, likely tied to how it interacts with the same calming brain signals that magnesium touches. The research there is still early, and the trials are small, worth saying plainly, but the direction they point is consistent. Pumpkin seeds also carry a fair amount of iron, which matters more for some people than others depending on their overall diet, and it's one more reason I'd rather see people reach for a handful of these than a processed snack bar loaded with things I can't pronounce off the label. There's a reason athletes have used magnesium and zinc together for years, often referred to by their mineral initials rather than spelled out, as part of a recovery routine. The evidence for dramatic performance gains from that combination hasn't held up especially well in larger studies, but for the more modest goal we're talking about tonight, steadier sleep and better overnight recovery, the case is a good deal stronger. I roast my own each fall, straight out of the pie pumpkins I grow along the back fence, tossed with a little salt and olive oil, low oven, stirred every 10 minutes or so until they're just barely golden. Store-bought works fine too, plain and raw, not the candied kind coated in sugar that shows up around the holidays. A small handful, maybe 2 tablespoons, works well stirred into that bowl of oats we just talked about, or eaten plain as an evening snack on their own. They're dense, so a little goes further than you'd expect. I learned that the hard way the first year. Ate a whole cup like popcorn and felt it the rest of the evening. Bone broth is next. Remember I mentioned it right at the start. The thing most folks throw in a pot and forget about. Here's exactly why it belongs on this list. Bone broth belongs on this list because of one amino acid in particular, glycine. And glycine does 2 separate jobs worth understanding. First, glycine is a major building block of collagen, the structural protein that makes up a large share of your skin, joints, tendons, and connective tissue. When your body is doing its overnight repair work, rebuilding what the day wore down, glycine is one of the raw materials that work depends on. Bone broth, simmered long and slow from bones and connective tissue, is one of the most concentrated food sources of it available. Second, and this is the part fewer people know, researchers have found that glycine taken before bed can improve subjective sleep quality on its own, separate from its role in tissue repair entirely. In small trials, people given glycine before bed reported falling asleep faster and feeling more refreshed the next morning, even when total sleep time barely changed. Something about it seems to lower core body temperature slightly, which happens to be one of the signals your body uses to initiate sleep in the first place. I've made broth from the same soup pot for years now, mostly out of the leftover bones after a roast, simmered 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours with a splash of vinegar to help pull the minerals out of the bone itself. Nothing fancy. My grandmother did the same thing out of necessity, using every part of the animal because nothing went to waste in her kitchen. Ever. I do it now, more by choice than necessity, and I think about her every time the pot's going. A small mug, warm, not scalding, in the last hour before bed. Plain is fine. A little salt if you need it. Some folks add a spoonful of turmeric or ginger, and there's nothing wrong with that, though the sleep benefit we're discussing tonight comes from the broth itself, not the additions. Store-bought works in a pinch if time's tight, but read the label closely. A lot of shelf-stable broths are mostly water and salt with barely any actual bone content, which means barely any glycine either. Spinach is next, and this one comes with something important to say before we go any further. Spinach comes with something important to say before we go any further, so let's get it out of the way first. Spinach, along with kale, collards, and most dark leafy greens, is one of the richest food sources of vitamin K. Vitamin K plays a role in a long list of things your body does well. But here's the caution. If you're on a blood-thinning medication like warfarin, vitamin K directly affects how that medication works, because the drug and the vitamin are, in a sense, working against each other in your bloodstream. That doesn't mean avoiding leafy greens if you're on blood thinners. It means keeping your intake consistent day to day and week to week, rather than swinging from almost none to a giant salad and back again. And it means having that specific conversation with your doctor so your medication dose accounts for your actual, ongoing diet. This is exactly the kind of thing I spent years watching catch people off guard at the bedside. Not because anyone did anything wrong, just because nobody had connected those two dots for them. As for why spinach belongs on tonight's list in the first place, it's another strong source of magnesium. Same theme we've circled back to more than once tonight. It also carries a meaningful amount of folate, which supports the same serotonin activity we talked about with kiwi earlier. And there's a smaller, less talked about piece. Spinach contains natural compounds that send a signal to your blood vessels to open up and breathe a little easier, the same way you'd throw open the windows on a hot summer afternoon. Better circulation overnight means oxygen and nutrients reach repairing tissue more efficiently, a quieter kind of support than the others on this list, but a real one. A cup of cooked spinach, wilted into eggs, stirred into that broth we just talked about, or simply sautéed with a little garlic alongside dinner, works fine. You don't need much. Cooking actually helps here, because it breaks down the plant's tough cell walls and makes several of these nutrients easier for your body to absorb than eating it raw. I grow more spinach than I know what to do with most springs, more than any one household needs, and I've given away armfuls of it over the years to neighbors who probably got tired of seeing me coming. Almonds are next, small, plain, and easy to overlook. Almonds are small, plain, and easy to overlook sitting next to flashier things on the shelf. They carry magnesium, same as so much of tonight's list, along with a measurable amount of melatonin right in the nut itself, similar to walnuts and tart cherries, though the amount varies more depending on the variety and how the almonds were processed. Roasting at high heat appears to reduce it somewhat, based on the research available, so raw almonds likely carry a slight edge here over the roasted kind for whatever that's worth. What almonds do especially well is combine healthy fat with real protein and fiber in one small package, which means they digest slowly and don't spike anything dramatically before bed. That steadiness matters more than people give it credit for. A snack that spikes and then crashes your blood sugar in the middle of the night can actually wake you up, the same way a cramp or a full bladder would, just from the inside instead. Almonds don't tend to do that. There's also a good dose of vitamin E in almonds, which works as one of the body's better defenses for cell membranes exactly when they are most exposed. During that overnight repair window we've talked about most of tonight. Some broader diet research, looking at Mediterranean-style eating patterns heavy in nuts like almonds, has linked that overall pattern to more consistent, better-rated sleep. Though it's worth saying plainly that's a whole dietary pattern being studied, not almonds acting alone. I keep raw almonds in 3 separate jars around the house now: kitchen, greenhouse, and the little table by my reading chair, because I found if there's only one jar, it never makes it to the room I actually need it in come 9 at night. There's a modesty to almonds I've come to appreciate the older I get. They don't need dressing up. No sauce, no seasoning required, though I'll admit a light toast with rosemary and sea salt is one of my small, regular indulgences most weekends. A small handful, roughly 10 to 12 almonds, is a sensible portion before bed. More than that, and you're eating a meal, not a snack, and undoing some of the steadiness we're after in the first place. Chamomile is next, and it's probably the one thing on tonight's list you already keep in the cupboard without thinking much about why it works. Chamomile is probably the one thing on tonight's list you already keep in the cupboard without thinking much about why it works. The compound doing most of the work is called apigenin, found concentrated in the chamomile flower itself. Apigenin works on the brain's primary calming signal system, the same general circuitry that certain prescription sleep and anti-anxiety medications also target, though by a gentler and less fully understood route. Think of those receptor sites as a dimmer switch for your brain's activity. Apigenin doesn't flip the light off, it just eases the dial down a notch, enough to help your mind settle without the heavy, foggy feeling some medications leave behind the next morning. And here's the important part to say, plainly, because it follows directly from what I just described. Since apigenin works on some of the same calming signals as certain prescription medications, chamomile can add to that effect rather than simply sitting alongside it. If you're taking a prescription sleep aid, an anti-anxiety medication, or a sedative of any kind, chamomile isn't automatically off limits, but it's absolutely worth a direct conversation with your doctor or pharmacist before making it a nightly habit. The same goes if you're on a blood thinner. Chamomile contains natural coumarin-related compounds, and in concentrated or frequent use, that can interact with how those medications work. This isn't the kind of thing to guess about. One honest conversation with the person managing your prescription settles it either way. For most people, without those particular medications in the picture, a warm cup of chamomile tea, 30 to 60 minutes before bed, has a long, well-documented history and a reasonable amount of modern research behind it, too. I grow my own chamomile along the garden path, more for the smell walking past it in July than anything else, though I dry a good amount each summer for the tea cupboard through winter. Steep it a full 10 minutes, longer than most tea bags suggest. That's where the actual apigenin content comes through, not the quick 3-minute steep most people are used to. Grapes are last on tonight's list, and they bring us right back around to where we started. Grapes are last on tonight's list, and they bring us right back around to where we started, with the Tart cherries and their small dose of natural melatonin. Grapes, especially the skins, carry melatonin too, along with a compound called resveratrol that's gotten a fair amount of attention in longevity research over the last 2 decades. Resveratrol is concentrated most heavily in the skin, which is part of why red wine gets talked about so much in this conversation, though I'd point you toward the whole fruit over the wine every time. The alcohol works against sleep quality in ways that undo whatever small benefit the resveratrol might offer, and that's worth being honest about rather than tiptoeing around. Early research on resveratrol has looked at its role in supporting the health of aging cells, including some of the same overnight repair processes we've been circling all through tonight's list. It's still early science, and I want to be careful not to oversell it. Preliminary observations, mostly from lab and animal studies so far, suggest resveratrol may support the same repair systems your body relies on during deep sleep. Human research is still catching up, and I'd rather tell you that plainly than dress it up as more settled than it is. A small bowl of grapes, seedless or not, doesn't much matter, about an hour before bed, gives you a bit of melatonin and a bit of resveratrol in one simple, familiar package. Frozen grapes make a fine treat, too, if you're the kind of person who likes something with a little texture in the evening, instead of just fruit at room temperature. I've got 2 rows of table grapes along the west fence. More work than I expected when I put them in, netting them every August against the birds who seem to know exactly when they're ripe before I do. Some years the birds win. Most years there's enough to share. That's 15, start to finish. And every one of them was sitting in an ordinary kitchen the whole time, waiting on somebody to look a little closer. Now that's 15 foods, each one carrying its own small piece of what your body reaches for once the lights go out and the real work begins. None of them are a cure for anything. I want to be plain about that one more time before we close out tonight. If sleep has been a real, ongoing struggle for you, the kind that's affecting your days, and not just the occasional restless night, that's worth bringing straight to your doctor. What we've walked through tonight is what the research suggests and what years at the bedside taught me to pay attention to. Nothing more, nothing less than that. If you found something useful in tonight's list, consider subscribing. I put a new one of these together most days, always working from real research, never from guesswork. And I'd be glad to have you along for the next one. Here's my question for you, out at the garden fence, so to speak. Of these 15, which one is already sitting in your kitchen tonight without you knowing what it was doing for you? And which one are you adding to the list before this week's out? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one of them, even if it takes me a few days to get to all of it some weeks. Until next time, may your rest be deep, your harvest be blessed, and may the Lord keep you and yours well. Good night, and God bless.